everyone, and welcome to our first edition of Listening Librarians for 2024. We are very excited to be here today because our theme was that we listened to recommendations from one another. And we are also very excited because Kimberly, our colleague, is officially joining us for Listening Librarians going forward. So Kimberly, why don't you kick us off with one of the recommendations that we gave you, and did you enjoy it, etc.?
Okay, the first one that I listened to was a recommendation from Jennifer, and this book was called Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by Kingfisher. Mona is a teenage, she's about 14, I believe it says, bread wizard. What's a bread wizard? Well, she has this strange power where she can make bread rise. And we'll get a little more into that later. But early one morning, she finds a body in the back room of her family bakery. And she goes to get help. Well, it turns out they blame her for the body, and she has no idea why. As she's headed off, they take her away and question her. When she comes back, they let her go. They realize that somebody is killing wizards. And most wizards have more important, so to say, powers than what Mona has. But as we're going to find out, Mona becomes very, very important with her bread wizard power. She has this hilarious sourdough starter called Bob. And Bob is in the basement of the bakery, and he likes to eat, let's say, all kinds of things that maybe the health department wouldn't approve of. But he is her sourdough starter that she uses to bake with. Basically, the main plot line of this is that their city is going to be attacked, and let's just say the adults don't really come to any great help in this. Mona, who, like I said, is 14, ends up basically being the hero of all the adults. There are lots of fun things that happen along the way. Bob plays a very important part. So do gingerbread men that she creates that are also absolutely hilarious. She also runs into another wizard who animates horse bones. So I'll leave it there. I would suggest listening to it. It's very funny. It has some important points to it, but it is absolutely hilarious, kind of in a way if you've ever read or listened to Terry Pratchett. That's kind of what it reminds me of, is a Terry Pratchett book. But I really, really enjoyed it. Kingfisher self-published this particular book because none of the editors could decide whether it was a middle grade, a YA, an adult book. So it is self-published, but it is available in book and audio format. And I would say I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you, Jennifer.
Sure. Yeah, this whole cozy fantasy thing that's been going on lately has come up with a few really interesting titles for us to look at. So glad you liked it. All right, so my first one is a book that Katy recommended to me called This Woven Kingdom by Tahereh Mafi that came out in 2022, and it's the first book in a trilogy, which is going to finish up sometime this spring, I think?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. So sort of a Cinderella retelling, but it really draws in elements of Persian mythology. And our main character is Aliza, who is a servant, a very skilled seamstress, but she's also a jinn, and the last of a powerful royal family of jinn. Now, in this world, there is peace between the humans and the jinn, but the jinn are still kind of treated as second-class citizens.
And they're kind of pushed to the fringes
very
of society.
much pushed to the fringes. And so she really has to hide that part of herself. And being a servant helps her with that, because that helps her, keep her eyes covered, because the eyes are very different if you're a jinn. But she doesn't entirely stay hidden. Because one day, the crown prince, Cameron, he's coming back home because his grandfather, who's the king, wants him to come back and settle down and then take over the throne. Cameron has been looking for spies in neighboring countries for years, but when he comes back and he's kind of incognito going through the city streets, he sees a street urchin attack this veiled servant, who is Eliza. And the servant, instead of screaming or running, she disarms the urchin and actually shows him some mercy. So he's like, this is odd. This is interesting. Why would she do that? Maybe she's a spy. So these two, cross paths, and he's intrigued, she's intrigued. There's a little bit of romance to it, but there's also the court politics, and the fact that Kamran's grandfather, the king, had a prophecy that he would be killed by jinn with ice in their veins, and it looks like Eliza might be that jinn. So the king wants her dead. So that kind of sets up the whole tension of the plot. It's a long read. It's about 13 and a half hours on audio. It's read by Kate Redding, who I enjoy as an audiobook narrator. She didn't feel quite right for this book. Would have been nice to have had like a known voices narrator instead. Agreed. Because she has a very British voice. So it's fine. It's not that it's bad, but it was just every now and then I kind of caught myself thinking, it would be kind of nice to hear something a little different. Really vivid descriptions. You really felt like you were there in that particular world. A couple of the things I wasn't as crazy about was the sort of insta-lovey kind of thing between the two.
It is a teen book.
It is a teen book.
Which sometimes happens with teen titles a little bit more, I'd say.
Yeah. And at least in this book, I don't know about the following two. It didn't seem like there were too many positive female figures. Because Eliza is working for this woman who's very mean to her, very cruel. Kamran's mother is not a great person.
She will continue to not be a great person in book 2.
Yeah, I wondered. But on the other hand, some of the male characters aren't that great either.
Yeah.
So, definitely a teen book. I enjoyed it. I didn't quite get all the way through it, but it's definitely setting up for some conflict in the next book.
Yeah.
And, it's a good fantasy for taking you to a different part of the world and experiencing something a little different.
Yeah. Adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for reading it.
Yeah.
So, one of the books that I listened to was The Cloisters, and Kimberly recommended this to me. It is by Katy Hay. It's about 10 hours, and it is narrated by Emily Tremaine, and I've listened to other things she's done before. She's always done a great job. So it is about Anne. She's a recent college grad from Walla Walla, Washington, which is just fun to say. And she's looking to escape her hometown. Her father recently passed away. And so she applies for a job at the Met. And during the welcome event, for new employees, she is told that the person that she was supposed to be working alongside has gone to Europe and there's no position available for her, so sorry, bye-bye. And she's like literally moved across the country, so immediately I'm like on her side. I'm like, no. So luckily for her, in walks Patrick. He is the curator at the Cloisters, which is this Gothic museum connected, not physically, but owned by the Met. It's more upstate, and it's known for its medieval art. So he offers Anne a position at the Cloisters working with him. And she says yes, and I would too if I had just moved across the country. And so she begins both working with Patrick and her colleague Rachel on this upcoming display that's going to be about astrology and the supernatural in medieval and Renaissance Europe. So everything's going pretty well. There's a few like little weird things that as a reader you pick up on and you're like, what's happening? But then they all find this 15th century tarot deck, and the tarot deck kind of changes everything. So that's when the book kind of gets a little more faster paced. And that's all I'm going to kind of say about the tarot deck, because that will bring in a lot of spoilers. So I loved the academicness of this novel. I read some of the reviews from other folks, and they actually said that they didn't like it, but I'm a history degree nerd, so I love any time that you can learn things. So you will learn a lot about medieval and Renaissance time and art, and the Cloisters, which is a real place. The one thing that kind of annoyed me, and it is a small thing, was Anne's age. So Anne is supposed to be someone who I believe just finished her Bachelor of Arts, but it's mentioned multiple times that because it's mentioned that she's applying to grad school, but her knowledge level feels much more like a postdoc, and I think it would have just made it would have been like one line, like she's a postdoc looking for a fellowship, rather than a recent bachelor's student looking for a job. Mm-hmm. So, because there's a lot of nuanced knowledge in this subject area. So there's just one tiny thing and that annoyed me. Anyway, it's a slow burn, but stick with it because the ending is kind of crazy. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So yay, thank you for recommending it to me, Kimberly.
I am now going to tell you about the book I listened to that was recommended by Katie, and that was called Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This particular novel is set in the Depression era in Kentucky, and it's basically, if you've ever heard about the horseback librarians that traveled from small area to small area delivering books. It was a program that Eleanor Roosevelt came up with during the Depression. But again, this is a fictional novel. Alice is our basically main character. I would say she's the main character. There are 5 women that are talked about as the librarians, but Alice is our main character. She is actually British, and she married an American named Bennett and moved to Kentucky. Bennett's father is the owner of several of the coal mines in the area, and let's just say he is not a nice guy at all. No. When she joins, she meets Marjorie, who is probably the second main character.
And kind of the best friend.
Yeah. Marjorie is I really liked Marjorie because she is that strong-willed woman in a very patriarchal society who doesn't feel that she needs to be in the kitchen. She'd rather be on horseback. She kind of does her own thing, which will have its problems later on. I'm going to mention one of the other main characters, and that is Sophia. And she is a Black woman who has actually been a librarian in the past. And she goes to work with the ladies doing the deliveries, which is kind of unusual because at this particular time period, libraries are still separated into the colored library and the white library. So there's a little bit of racial politics, that type of thing. I'm not going to give you much more of the plot other than to say that this book contains a lot of different things. There are several romances. It deals with censorship. There is a murder and a trial. Well, a death in a trial.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a murder. There are a lot of domestic issues. There are a lot of issues about being in a coal mining town and what that was like during the Depression. I'll give you a warning. There is pet death and there is some domestic violence. It is very well written. I enjoyed listening to it, but it's not my normal cup of tea. The quality of the book was excellent. Quality-wise, I would give it probably a 4.5. But I can't say that I really loved it because it's just not my type of thing. Yeah. But it was very well done, so I don't regret listening to it. So thank you, Katie.
Oh, you're welcome. Yay. Great, like, portrait of what life was maybe like. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I'm a nerd. Anytime I can read about librarians, it's a good time. So the next book that I listened to was a recommendation from Jennifer, and that is Pride and Premeditation by Tirzah Price. It is 9 hours, and it is part 1 of the Jane Austen murder mystery series. So I'm going to start by saying that this is probably not something I normally would have picked up when I don't know. There's something about me. I tend to, if I'm reading a mystery, it tends to be more gritty and gruesome.
Yeah. Whereas I like mine cozy.
Yes, but I know I had seen it because the cover is stunning. Yeah. So like it had kind of been on my radar. Now, I had read Pride and Prejudice in high school, so it's been a while. Yeah. Now, the plot is that Lizzie, or Elizabeth Bennet, as you might know her from the original Pride and Prejudice, she longs to be a barrister at her father's law firm. And when Mr. Bennet suggests she finds a case to prove her worth, she swoops in when she hears that Mr. Bingley has been accused of murdering Mr. Hurst. So you're getting a lot of the characters from Pride and Prejudice, of course. Now, Lizzie begins her investigation only to find out that he has already hired a lawyer, and that is Mr. Darcy. And they, of course, jump to lots of conclusions about one another, just like in the original. I enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun. There's a lot more focus on the murder mystery aspect than there is on the idea of romance and marriage like there is in the original. Lizzie, of course, is not going to be dissuaded by Mr. Darcy. She's going to find this murderer herself. She was a lovely, spunky character. I definitely enjoyed when she would stand up to like male characters who just saw her as like a silly woman. But she also knew when she needed help, which, you know. Now, since I hadn't read Pride and Prejudice in so long, it was kind of nice because as characters would be introduced, I'd be like, wait a minute, what, is he the one that did XYZ in the original? And is he the one that was like maybe a little naughty? And so because of that, I didn't immediately know who the bad guy was, but I had an inkling. Yeah. I was like, am I remembering correct? So it was fun. And I think my favorite character though was Mrs. Bennet because she was just like stupidly funny without meaning to, because she's you can't investigate murder because you'll never find a husband, or he could never be a murderer because he's wealthy. And you're like, oh honey.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah. So that was a good recommendation. So,
yeah, and I've not gotten around to the others in the series. Okay. But because I'm a big Pride and Prejudice fan and I love reading all sorts of retellings, yeah, I had to do a murder mystery for that one.
Yeah, and book 2 is Sense and
Second Degree.
Yeah,
or something. Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, my last one is a recommendation by Kimberly. And I'm going to start this by saying that I know Kimberly loves her a good heist novel. And we had lists of multiple books that we shared with each other so we could pick from many different titles. So my first pick had been Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. But There's no audiobook on Libby, so scratch that off the list. My second choice was The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi, because there was an audiobook, and I have read the book before, but it's been a while, and I never finished the trilogy. So I started to listen to the audiobook, and I just couldn't stand the narrator. You know, sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
You get a narrator who you just don't vibe with.
It's a wonderful story if you
Yeah.
want to read it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I will pick it up in print again sometime and actually try and get through the trilogy, but it's not going to happen on audio. Sad to say. So what I did end up reading is a book called Invictus by Ryan Graudin. It was published in 2017, and this is another teen novel, only this time it's a sci-fi heist. Because our main character goes by the name of Far, it's short for Farway Gaius McCarthy. Now, Far is an interesting character because he is the son of a time traveler from the 24th century and a Roman gladiator from 95 AD. Yeah. So, Farway is studying to become a licensed time traveler, but in the middle of his final exam where he is put into this kind of simulation, he gets caught off guard by one of the characters winking at him. Now, the characters aren't supposed to recognize that he's there, so he's very, very confused, and he ends up failing. Now, what is he going to do? Because he was determined to be a time traveler, and now he's flunked out, and now what? Well, a mysterious figure named Lux offers him an out. He can be the captain of time travel missions, in which he goes back to the past to plunder some treasures. It's kind of a Faustian bargain. I mean, he doesn't exactly know what he's getting into. He knows this is going to be kind of shady, but what else is he going to do? He's not going to be a licensed one through his academy. And this guy Lux is going to let him pick his crew so he can bring his friends on board. And they'll have a good time, I guess, going back and getting treasures that hopefully won't upset the time continuum or whatever. So on one of their missions, they get sent back to 1912 and the Titanic.
Oh.
And they're supposed to retrieve a treasure before the ship goes down. Now, somebody else is on board who isn't supposed to be there. And this mysterious person, a girl named Elliot, seems to know more about what's going on than Far does, and she leads him and his team on kind of a race, not just through the ship, but through time. And Far is really intrigued because he recognizes Elliot as the person from his final exam who saw him and winked at him. So something is going on. And it turns out that Elliot is trying to stop the annihilation of the multiverse.
Oh, that's
Dun,
important.
dun, dun. So I'm going to leave it at that because there's a whole lot going on with that. The book is a little longer. It's just under 14 hours. It's narrated by Maxwell Hamilton, but it was fun. I mean, I like sci-fi. Like you, I like a good heist novel. I like time travel. I like found family. It's got it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a fun ride. I'm glad I had the chance to read that because I had never heard of it before even. So that was great. Thank you.
All right. So, well, yay. I mean, giving people book recommendations is like part of being a librarian. So we're all pretty good at our jobs, it sounds like. Next month will be February, and we will be coming with some Afrofuturism books, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. And so thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.